What if the real danger isn't what we see, but what disappears without a trace? In California, 13 lives were erased, vanished from existence, leaving only shadows and silence. These aren't just missing person cases. They are chilling reminders of the unknown, where the truth is hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. Case 1. Kristen Modafferi. It was the summer of 1997, the kind of summer that seemed to glow with promise. San Francisco, a city known for its picturesque views and bustling streets, was a place full of life. Yet in the midst of this vibrant city, one young woman would vanish, and with her disappearance, a dark silence would settle over her family and the city itself. Kristen Modafferi, a bright 18-year-old, was like many others, just trying to navigate her way into adulthood, finding herself while balancing a summer job and plans for the future. June 23, 1997, should have been another ordinary day for Kristen. She worked at a coffee shop in the city, a job that allowed her to interact with people while saving up for her next big step in life. But it wasn't just any day. It would be the day she would disappear without a trace. By all accounts, nothing unusual happened during her shift. She finished work, made plans to meet up with friends later, and simply vanished. The footage was the last piece of tangible evidence her family would have for years. Her disappearance wasn't just a case of a young woman leaving and failing to return. It was something far more unsettling. Despite the efforts of the police, her trail quickly went cold. No signs of struggle, no footprints to follow. The city, once so full of life and energy, seemed to swallow her whole. Friends, family, and even complete strangers began to ask themselves, how could someone disappear so completely, so utterly? In the days that followed, the search for Kristen intensified. Volunteer groups scoured the city, while law enforcement pieced together whatever clues they could find. But the more they searched, the less they seemed to uncover. There were no signs of foul play, no trace of Kristen in any of the usual places. She had simply vanished. For months, her family clung to the hope that Kristen was still alive, that perhaps she had been abducted, taken somewhere far from home. But as weeks turned into months, and months into years, the painful reality began to set in. Kristen's disappearance was more than just a case of a missing person. It was an unsolved mystery, one that still haunts those who knew her. There were theories, many of them, each one adding another layer of complexity to an already unfathomable situation. Some believed she had fallen victim to a random act of violence, while others thought she might have willingly disappeared, leaving her life behind. But despite these speculations, the truth remained elusive. Kristen Modafferi's name became one of many in a long list of unsolved disappearances in the state of California. Yet for her family, the pain of not knowing the truth about what happened to their daughter never faded. Her case remains open, but the answers are still out of reach. For Kristen's family, the search continues, not just for justice, but for closure. What happened to Kristen Modafferi on that summer day in 1997? Was she the victim of something far more sinister, or did she? Case 2. Evelyn Hernandez. In May 2002, San Francisco, a city known for its vibrant arts and culture, became the backdrop to one of its most haunting and unresolved mysteries. Evelyn Hernandez, a 24-year-old pregnant woman, was last seen alive on May 1st, a date that would mark the beginning of an agonizing chapter for her family. A young mother-to-be, Evelyn was looking forward to the arrival of her child. She had big dreams for her future, her life unfolding with the hope of motherhood. But just days before that new chapter could begin, Evelyn vanished. Her disappearance didn't start with the usual signs, a hasty departure, a sudden crisis, or an argument. No, Evelyn simply stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to work, and, more tellingly, vanished from the life she had built for herself. No one saw it coming, and no one had a clue about where she might have gone. But her family, especially her mother, knew one thing for certain: Evelyn wouldn't have just disappeared without a trace. Something was terribly wrong. For weeks, authorities scoured the city for clues, desperate to find any evidence that could lead to answers. But with each passing day, the case grew colder. Friends and family had nothing to go on, and the police were left with more questions than solutions. As the search expanded, investigators discovered that the only piece of evidence that could provide some sort of closure was not what anyone had hoped to find. In late May, nearly a month after her disappearance, a gruesome discovery was made. Evelyn's torso was found in the San Francisco Bay. But what was even more unsettling was that the remains were incomplete. Her head and unborn child were missing, making the discovery not just a tragic end, but a horrifying puzzle. How had she ended up in the bay? Why was she dismembered in such a disturbing manner? And where was her baby? These questions would haunt her loved ones for years to come. The discovery of her remains led to a wave of confusion and grief. Authorities were left with more questions than answers. The investigation revealed that Evelyn had been in the midst of a difficult personal situation, and some began to speculate that she might have fallen victim to a crime involving someone close to her. But with little evidence to go on, and no signs of a struggle or forced entry into her home, the case turned into a maze with no clear way out. What happened to Evelyn Hernandez? Who could have been responsible for such a heinous act? Was she the victim of a random, senseless crime, or was this something far more personal, something carefully planned and carried out with chilling precision? The unanswered questions surrounding her death continue to cloud the investigation, and the mystery of her disappearance remains one of San Francisco's most chilling. Case 3. Ariana Fitz. In 2016, San Francisco became the setting for one of the most heart-wrenching and perplexing mysteries involving a child and her mother. On March 6th of that year, 2-year-old Ariana Fitz vanished without a trace. But her disappearance wasn't the beginning of her story. It was the tragic end to a series of unimaginable events that no one saw coming. Ariana's mother, Nicole Fitz, had already faced struggles of her own, and her life was full of complications. She had a history of running into trouble, a past that seemed, at least on the surface, to be full of challenges. Yet, despite her struggles, Nicole was a mother who loved her child dearly and wanted the best for her. In the days leading up to Ariana's disappearance, Nicole had been staying with a man named Mark Fitz, who had also been involved with the case. But just days before her death, Nicole was found murdered, her body buried in a shallow grave. No one knew how or why this happened, but what was even more haunting was that Ariana was nowhere to be found. The events that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Authorities quickly discovered that Nicole's death wasn't a random act. It was intentional, and evidence began to surface that marked it as a premeditated crime. But the true horror of this case was that, while investigators scrambled to piece together what had happened to Nicole, little Ariana's whereabouts remained a mystery. Where was she? Had she been taken? Was she alive? The search for Ariana, once believed to have been with her mother when the tragedy struck, became the central focus of the investigation. For months, law enforcement and volunteers scoured the city, following every lead, but they were left with nothing. No traces of the toddler. No signs of life. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The mystery surrounding Ariana's disappearance would deepen as authorities delved further into the complex relationship between Nicole and Mark Fitz. Investigators uncovered disturbing details about his involvement and began to suspect that he might have been the key to understanding both Nicole's death and Ariana's vanishing. But despite their efforts, they hit a dead end. Mark Fitz, once a person of interest in the case, was later cleared of any direct involvement, though suspicion continued to hover over him like an unanswered question. With no suspects, no clear motive, and no sign of Ariana, the investigation seemed to stall. It was a devastating blow for those who loved her, especially her family, who were left grasping for answers, unable to understand why or how something so cruel could have happened. They would never get to see Ariana's bright smile again, never have the chance to watch her grow up, and the pain of that loss would stay with them forever. The loss wasn't just physical. It was the loss of time, memories, and hope. For the family, every passing day without Ariana felt like another day they would never get back. Case 4. Natalie Wood. In the early morning hours of November 29, 1981, the world lost one of its brightest stars. Natalie Wood, the celebrated actress known for her roles in West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause.
I thought he'd rub off my lips, and I ran out of that house.
Is that why you were wandering around at 1 o'clock in the morning? Weren't looking for company, were you?
I don't even know why I do it.
Was found dead in the cold waters off Catalina Island, a short distance from her family's yacht. What should have been a peaceful holiday spent with loved ones on a boat turned into one of Hollywood's most famous and mysterious tragedies. Wood's death was initially ruled an accidental drowning, but the circumstances surrounding her final moments have always been clouded in uncertainty. She had been aboard the yacht with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and fellow actor Christopher Walken. The events leading up to her death are marked by conflicting accounts and unanswered questions, leaving a trail of suspicion that has never fully dissipated. The details of that night have been dissected and debated for decades, yet the truth remains elusive. Wood had been in a difficult period in her life. She was reportedly having a strained relationship with her husband, Robert Wagner. The tension between them was said to have intensified during the trip. According to Wagner, the evening began calmly, with the three of them enjoying dinner and drinks on the boat. However, things took a turn when Wagner and Walken got into a heated argument. What exactly this argument was about, and whether it played a role in what happened to Wood, remains uncertain. That night, Wood allegedly attempted to leave the boat to go ashore in a small dinghy. She was found later, floating in the water, her body discovered by a crew member. Her body was badly bruised, and there were signs that she had struggled in the water before her death. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, but there were no clear answers as to how she ended up in the water in the first place. There were immediate questions that needed to be answered. Why did Natalie Wood, a woman who had been on the boat with others just hours before, end up in the water? Why did it take so long for authorities to respond to the emergency? What had really happened between Wagner and Walken that night? And did it contribute to her death? These questions lingered, unresolved, even as the years went by. Wagner's initial statements about the events of that night seemed to have inconsistencies. He claimed that he had gone to bed and didn't realize Wood was missing until hours later. However, the timeline of events presented by the authorities did not fully align with Wagner's version of what had occurred. In 2011, new evidence prompted the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to reopen the case, citing unexplained injuries on Wood's body and an insufficient investigation at the time. This renewed investigation led to further speculation, including theories about whether Wagner was involved in his wife's death, whether it was an accident, or whether someone else had played a role. At the heart of the mystery was Wood herself, an actress who had captured the hearts of millions, but whose personal life was marked by deep emotional turmoil. She had been in and out of relationships, struggled with a history of trauma, and battled inner demons that had long been hidden from the public. Wood's life, filled with both beauty and complexity, raised the question of whether she could have taken her own life or whether she had been victim to something far darker. The more investigators probed, the more the questions piled up. Some wondered if Wood's death was the result of an argument that escalated too far, while others considered the possibility that she was the victim of an accident while intoxicated. But the most unsettling theory, one that continues to linger, suggests that foul play may have been involved. Could her death have been intentional? Was it an accident? Could there have been another person involved? These questions, unanswered by the initial investigation, still remain at the forefront of this tragic case. Despite the years that have passed, the case remains one of Hollywood's most famous unsolved mysteries. Wood's death marked a turning point in the public's understanding of the dangers that lay behind the glitz and glamour of the entertainment industry. It revealed the very human side of the stars, the pressures, the relationships, and the untold stories behind the fame. Today, Natalie Wood is remembered as one of the great actresses of her time, but her death continues to overshadow her legacy. Case 5. Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a passerby stumbled upon a gruesome scene in Los Angeles. In a vacant lot, the mutilated body of Elizabeth Short, a young woman who had gone missing just days earlier, was discovered. Her body had been severed at the waist, with distinct, deliberate cuts that left a chilling mark on the history of unsolved murders in America. The victim, whose name would soon become synonymous with tragedy, was given a grim moniker by the press: the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short was a 22-year-old woman, originally from Boston, who had come to Los Angeles in pursuit of fame. She had dreams of becoming an actress.
I'm an actress. I'm gonna make it big.
Like so many others who flocked to Hollywood with hopes of making it big. Short had been living in California for several years, and though she struggled to land major roles, she remained in the city, living in a transient world where the line between reality and illusion was blurred. Her life, though tragically short, was full of mysteries. Friends described her as a friendly, if somewhat troubled, young woman with a particular fondness for wearing black clothing. She had been seen in various parts of Los Angeles in the days leading up to her death. But no one had any idea that her life would be violently cut short in the most gruesome way possible. The discovery of her body was horrifying, but what made the case even more disturbing were the details surrounding her murder. Elizabeth Short's body was not just discarded, it was posed. Her mouth had been cut from ear to ear in what appeared to be a smile, an unsettling image that only fueled the media frenzy that followed. Her body had been drained of blood, and her skin was pale, adding to the eerie quality of the crime. The brutality and precision with which she was killed led many to believe that her murderer had some experience with violence or had committed other similar acts. The initial investigation was swift, and the police quickly began to question those who had known Elizabeth Short. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers who had seen her in the days before her murder were brought in for questioning. Numerous suspects were proposed, but none of them were ever definitively linked to the crime. The case soon became a national obsession, with journalists and the public alike speculating on every detail. Despite the extensive media coverage and numerous investigations, no one was ever convicted of Elizabeth Short's murder. Over the years, many theories have emerged, each one offering a different version of what happened that fateful night. Some believed it was the work of a serial killer, while others thought it might have been the result of a botched medical procedure. The police interviewed a wide range of suspects, from former lovers to Hollywood figures, but none of them could be linked to the crime in any conclusive way. One of the most enduring aspects of the Black Dahlia case is the question of motive. Was Elizabeth Short the victim of a random, senseless act of violence, or was she targeted for a specific reason? Some investigators believe her death might have been connected to a darker underworld, while others theorize that she was the victim of someone close to her, someone who knew her well enough to be able to manipulate the scene in such a calculated and chilling way. The lack of clear answers has left the case open for decades, and it remains one of the most infamous unsolved murders in U.S. history. Over the years, there have been numerous attempts to uncover the truth behind the Black Dahlia murder. In 1949, a man named George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles doctor, was investigated and even considered a prime suspect. His name would resurface in later years as a possible culprit, with some believing that he had ties to the case and might have been responsible for the crime. However, no solid evidence was ever found to prove Hodel's involvement, and the case once again slipped into the abyss of unsolved mysteries. The Black Dahlia case has captivated the public for more than 7 decades. It has been the subject of books, films, and countless documentaries. Each new generation of investigators and amateur sleuths brings fresh eyes to the case, hoping to finally unlock the secrets that have remained hidden for so long. Case 6. Jean Spangler. In the heart of 1949, amidst the glitter and allure of Hollywood, a woman's disappearance would leave an unsettling mark on the city's history. Jean Spangler, a young actress and model, was last seen on October 7, 1949, a date that would forever be tied to her haunting disappearance. It was a night that seemed ordinary enough. Jean left her apartment, leaving behind plans to meet her ex-husband. She was carrying a purse and, most curiously, had a note for her mother that read, "Don't worry about me. I'll be back by midnight." But she was never seen again. Jean Spangler was a hopeful starlet, just another face among the many looking to make it big in the movie industry. While she didn't achieve the level of fame that many of her peers did, she was a familiar figure, working small parts in films and as a dancer in clubs. Still, despite her charm and beauty, her life had its struggles. She had an ongoing, complicated relationship with her ex-husband, and her daughter, who was just 2 years old at the time, was often in her care. But beyond these personal challenges, she seemed to have an optimistic view of her future, with dreams of breaking into a bigger role in the film industry. On the night of her disappearance, Jean's plans were simple. She was headed to meet her ex-husband, Dexter Benner, to discuss their daughter's custody. However, she never made it to that meeting. Instead, her purse was found abandoned in Griffith Park, with the contents seemingly untouched. Her keys, wallet, and a strange note found in her purse only deepened the mystery. The note, written in a hurried manner, read, "I'm going to meet some people about a job, don't worry about me. I'll be home by midnight." The oddest part, however, was the brief mention of someone named Kenny. It was unclear who this person was, but it was the last clue investigators would have for some time. Her purse wasn't the only thing found in Griffith Park. A woman's shoe was discovered nearby. Was this a sign of a struggle? Or had she been abducted somewhere else and brought to the park? The authorities were puzzled by the lack of evidence and the strange nature of the situation. She had disappeared without a trace. There was no sign of forced entry into her apartment, no strange phone calls or messages indicating danger. Her family had no idea who would want to harm her. Theories began to surface almost immediately. Was it a crime of passion? Jean had been in and out of relationships, one of which had been with a man named Kenny, a figure who was never fully identified. Could this man have been involved in her disappearance? Or was Jean trying to escape something, or perhaps someone in her life? Some speculated that she had been in financial trouble, while others suggested the possibility of her being mixed up in something more nefarious, something connected to her brief association with the Hollywood underworld. The world of entertainment, after all, had its secrets, and Jean's place within it was far from certain. For years, the case would remain a mystery, with few new developments to help uncover the truth. The police worked tirelessly, but without any solid leads, their investigation seemed to stall. Was Jean's disappearance a random act, or had someone close to her been involved? Her ex-husband, Dexter Benner, became one of the primary persons of interest, but he was never charged or linked to her disappearance in any meaningful way. Theories persisted, some claiming Jean had gotten caught up in a love affair gone wrong, others suggesting that she had been the victim of something darker, an unknown figure who had taken advantage of her in a city where dreams could easily turn into nightmares. As the months turned into years, the case began to lose steam. But even decades after Jean Spangler's disappearance, her story continued to captivate the public. Over the years, new theories and documentaries would surface, attempting to unravel the mystery. Some suggested that she might have been involved in organized crime, while others believed she had simply vanished on her own accord, seeking a new life away from her past in Hollywood. But none of these theories ever led to concrete answers. To this day, Jean Spangler remains an enduring mystery, a symbol of the unknown that still haunts Los Angeles. Her name echoes in the shadows of Hollywood's golden age, a reminder of the dark secrets lurking behind the glitz and glamour. Her case is one of the many unsolved mysteries in the history of Los Angeles. But for those who knew her, and for the daughter she left behind, Jean's story is far from forgotten. The question still lingers. What happened to Jean Spangler? Was it a tragic accident, a crime of passion, or something more? Case 7. Reet Jurvetson. In the summer of 1969, Los Angeles was a city buzzing with life, fame, and change. But hidden within its sprawling streets and sun-soaked landscape, one tragic story would go untold for decades. Reet Jurvetson, a woman whose name few knew at the time, was found dead in a secluded spot near Mulholland Drive, one of the most famous roads in the city. Her body, discarded like an afterthought, would remain unidentified for over 40 years. The identity of her killer, too, would stay hidden, a mystery that has lingered through the years unanswered. Reet was only 23 when she disappeared. At the time, she was living in Los Angeles, trying to carve out a life in a city where dreams often met harsh realities. Though not much is known about her background, reports suggest she had moved to California for a fresh start. She had lived in places like Santa Monica, known for its allure and the chance it offered people to begin again. But despite her hopes, her story ended in a way that would become the stuff of cold case lore. In late 1969, Reet vanished. She was last seen leaving a bar, but no one could recall where she went after that. No one knew what happened to her, and for several weeks, her family and friends lived in a suspended state of confusion, not knowing if she had left on her own or met with foul play. The next time Reet's name surfaced in the news was when her body was found dumped in a secluded area near Mulholland Drive on the morning of October 7, 1969. Her body was badly decomposed, making it difficult for investigators to gather any meaningful clues. The initial investigation revealed that Reet had been murdered. She had been killed in a brutal manner, but there was no clear sign of a struggle or any indication of what led up to her death. What remained was a woman left in an anonymous grave, her identity unknown and her story seemingly over. The initial police investigation quickly hit a wall. There were no obvious leads. No one in the area had seen anything. No one had heard anything. The authorities had little to go on, and with no signs of forced entry or a struggle, it seemed as though the killer had acted swiftly and without a trace. The case went cold almost immediately. For years, Reet's body remained a Jane Doe. Investigators scoured Los Angeles for any leads that could identify her, but no one came forward. There were no missing person reports that matched her description. It seemed as though she had appeared out of nowhere. The woman found near Mulholland Drive wasn't just a murder victim. She was a nameless figure in a city known for anonymity. It wasn't until 2015, more than 40 years after her body was found, that Reet Jurvetson was finally identified. Advances in DNA testing and the relentless pursuit of answers by her family led to the breakthrough. For decades, she had been buried in an unmarked grave, her name forgotten. But through modern technology, she was finally given her identity back. Her family could now mourn their loved one by name, but the pain of knowing how long she had been a mystery only deepened their grief. Yet, even with Reet's identity confirmed, the question remained: who killed her? Her killer, after all these years, has never been found. Despite extensive investigation into her death, authorities have failed to uncover any solid evidence that could lead them to the person responsible. There were theories, of course. Some believed that Reet's killer was someone she knew, possibly a romantic partner, or an acquaintance who turned violent. But with no evidence to support any of these theories, the case remains unsolved. Will the mystery ever be solved? Can the darkness of Mulholland Drive ever be fully explained? We may never know. But one thing remains clear. Reet Jurvetson's story, like the countless others lost in the shadows of time, will never be forgotten. Case 8. Walter Collins. In 1928, Los Angeles was a city full of hope, opportunity, and hidden dangers. The streets buzzed with the promise of a better life, but for one family, this promise would come crashing down in a tragedy that has never been fully explained. Walter Collins, a 9-year-old boy, vanished without a trace on the night of March 10, 1928. His disappearance, as devastating as it was for his family, would soon be overshadowed by a strange twist in the case that would make headlines across the country and change the course of the investigation forever. Walter Collins was like any other boy in Los Angeles. He had a love for adventure, a playful spirit, and a family that adored him. His mother, Christine Collins, was a hard-working woman, doing her best to raise Walter on her own after the death of her husband. The two had a close bond, and Walter's disappearance was a blow that shattered her world. On that fateful day, Walter was last seen leaving the house to go to the movies. When he didn't return, Christine knew something was terribly wrong. She searched desperately for him, but there was no sign of her son. No one knew where he had gone, and the streets of Los Angeles were suddenly filled with whispers and uncertainty. What happened to Walter Collins? Was he taken? Was he lost? For weeks, no one knew. The case quickly gained media attention, and the search for the young boy intensified. Investigators scoured the city, interviewed neighbors, and followed up on every possible lead. But each one led to a dead end. The disappearance seemed almost too complete, too untraceable. And then, just as hope was beginning to fade, an unexpected break in the case would take the investigation down a path that no one could have anticipated. In late August of 1928, more than 4 months after Walter's disappearance, authorities claimed to have found him in DeKalb, Illinois, more than 2,000 miles away from Los Angeles. A boy, who was said to be Walter Collins, had been found, and he was brought back to Los Angeles to be reunited with his mother. For Christine Collins, the news was both a relief and a heartache. She had been told that her son had been found alive, and the city rejoiced at what seemed to be the happy resolution of a horrific ordeal. But when Christine saw the boy who had been brought back to her, something didn't sit right. The child in front of her didn't look like Walter. He was older than Walter was when he disappeared, and his mannerisms, the way he spoke, were unfamiliar to her. Despite the boy's insistence that he was Walter, Christine refused to accept the reunion. She immediately expressed her doubts, stating that this was not her son. The situation quickly escalated, and Christine's refusal to accept the boy as Walter became a legal battle. The authorities, unwilling to let go of what they believed to be a solved case, insisted that the boy was indeed her son. Christine, however, was adamant that she knew her son, and that the boy in front of her was not him. She was eventually forced into a psychiatric evaluation for delusional thinking after publicly questioning the authorities, and the case became one of the most notorious in American legal history. The press dubbed it the Changeling Case, a tragic story of a mother who refused to accept a lie. The boy, who had been falsely identified as Walter, was later found to be a young imposter named Arthur Hutchins Jr., a runaway from Illinois with a troubled past. Hutchins had been trying to pass himself off as Walter Collins, but his deception unraveled quickly once authorities began to dig deeper. He had no clear explanation for why he had taken on the identity of a missing child, but it was clear that his motivations were far from innocent. Hutchins was never charged with the crime of impersonating Walter Collins, but his role in the case only added to the mystery surrounding the young boy's disappearance. As for the real Walter Collins, no trace of him was ever found. Despite the widespread search, despite the media frenzy, and despite the tragic false lead of the imposter, the real Walter's fate remains one of Los Angeles's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. There were no new leads, no sightings, no breakthroughs. Walter's disappearance was a hole in the city's history, a story of loss and unanswered questions that would never be closed. Case 9. Mitris Richardson. On the evening of September 17, 2009, a young woman named Mitris Richardson was released from the Malibu police station, a decision that would set off a chain of events that would leave her family searching for answers for years. At the time, she had been arrested for a relatively minor offense: failure to pay for a meal at a local restaurant. It was a situation that many believed would resolve quickly and without incident. But Mitris, a 24-year-old with no criminal history, never made it home. That night, she walked out of the police station into the darkness, alone, and vanished without a trace. Mitris's case was unusual from the start. Her arrest had been fairly routine. She had been detained after a dispute at the restaurant in Malibu. However, the circumstances surrounding her release from police custody were far from typical. At the time of her arrest, Mitris was described as acting erratically. According to the police, she had been exhibiting unusual behavior during her time at the station, talking nonsensically, seemingly confused, and displaying signs of mental distress. Despite this, she was still released in the middle of the night, without anyone knowing where she would go or how she would get there. What makes Mitress's case so troubling is not just her disappearance, but the circumstances of her release. Despite her odd behavior, she was sent away from the police station without adequate care or assistance. No one knows why the authorities failed to ensure she was safely transported, or why no family members or friends were contacted. She was allowed to walk into the night, lost and alone in the darkened hills of Malibu. The authorities' failure to properly handle the situation set the stage for a prolonged and heartbreaking search. Mitress's family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Her mother, Lettice Sutton, was frantic as she tried to make sense of her daughter's sudden disappearance. For days, she was left to wonder why Mitress had been released in such a vulnerable state, alone in an unfamiliar area. But as the search continued, it became clear that the mystery would only deepen. Weeks went by, then months, without a trace of Mitress. No phone calls, no sightings, no signs that she had been in the area. Her family and volunteers scoured the vast landscapes of Malibu, trying to make sense of what had happened. In November of 2009, 11 months after her disappearance, Mitress's skeletal remains were discovered in a remote part of Malibu Canyon, not far from where she had been released. But the discovery only brought more questions. There was no obvious cause of death, no signs of foul play, no obvious injuries. The medical examiner could not definitively conclude how Mitress had died, leaving the cause of death as an ongoing mystery. Mitress's remains were found in a location that had already been thoroughly searched. Her body had been hidden in a place that was easily accessible, yet it was somehow overlooked for nearly a year. The fact that her remains were discovered so far from where she had been released added to the confusion. How had she ended up there? What had happened to her during the months she was missing? The discovery of her remains raised further doubts about the handling of her case. Her family, understandably, was devastated. How could a woman who had been exhibiting signs of mental distress be released in such a dangerous and vulnerable condition? How could the authorities have allowed her to walk into the night, alone and unprotected, in an area that was known for its rugged terrain and wildlife? Why had the search for her not been more thorough? As the investigation continued, it became clear that there were many unanswered questions. Some believed that Mitress might have become lost in the wilderness, unable to find her way in the unfamiliar terrain. Others theorized that she might have encountered someone who meant her harm during the time she was missing, but no evidence could confirm either of these possibilities, and no one was ever charged in connection with her death. Mitress Richardson's case quickly became a symbol of systemic failures within the criminal justice system. The decision to release her, despite her erratic behavior, raised concerns about the police department's handling of vulnerable individuals. Why had the authorities not recognized the signs of mental illness? Why had no effort been made to contact her family, to ensure she was safely taken home or placed under care? The failure to protect Mitress, to ensure her safety, and to conduct a thorough investigation into her disappearance became the focus of public outcry. Her case sparked debates about mental health and the treatment of individuals who are in crisis. Many saw Mitress as a victim of a system that failed to recognize the importance of proper care and intervention. Had she received the help she needed, her tragic fate might have been averted. Instead, she was left to navigate a world she was clearly not prepared for, leading to a disappearance that would leave her family in agony and confusion for years. To this day, the mystery of Mitress Richardson's death remains unresolved. Her family, still in search of answers, continues to press for justice, but the road ahead remains uncertain. The question of what happened to Mitress, what led to her tragic end, lingers unanswered, a painful reminder of the systems that failed her. Her story is one of loss, frustration, and a mother's tireless fight to find out what happened to her daughter. Lettice Sutton, Mitress's mother, has not stopped seeking answers. She has been vocal about the failures in the case, from the improper handling of her daughter's release to the lack of a proper investigation. For Lettice, the agony of not knowing the truth about her daughter's death is a burden that no parent should have to bear. Case Diaz, Lesnar Noe Velasquez Cardenas. On May 29, 2025, Lesnar Noe Velasquez Cardenas, a 32-year-old father of two, was dropped off at a trailhead near the base of Mount Shasta, a towering and remote peak in Northern California. What started as a routine hiking trip would soon become one of the most perplexing missing person cases in recent memory, one that would spark months of unanswered questions and heart-wrenching uncertainty. Lesnar was an avid hiker, someone who had spent years exploring the rugged landscapes of California. His love for the outdoors was well known among friends and family, and he often took solo trips to reconnect with nature and escape from the pressures of daily life. On that fateful day, Lesnar had arranged with a friend to drop him off at the trailhead near Mount Shasta. He was planning to hike along the northern routes, an area known for its breathtaking views and difficult terrain. Lesnar's plan was simple. He would spend the day hiking and would return to the trailhead by evening to be picked up. But when evening came, Lesnar was nowhere to be found. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance are as baffling as they are troubling. Lesnar had made no plans to venture off the main trail, and he was known for being cautious and prepared when hiking in unfamiliar terrain. Yet, when his friend arrived to pick him up, there was no sign of Lesnar. The trailhead, usually a busy spot for hikers, was empty. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle, and no indication that anything unusual had occurred. His friend immediately contacted the authorities, and within hours, a search team was assembled. The search for Lesnar would take place over several days, with teams combing through the dense woods, the rocky slopes, and the surrounding wilderness. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the terrain, while search dogs were brought in to try and pick up his scent. But despite the extensive efforts, no trace of Lesnar was found. The situation grew more dire with each passing day. The search continued for weeks, with no new leads emerging. The area around Mount Shasta is vast, with dense forests and steep ridges, making it difficult to navigate and search thoroughly. The longer Lesnar remained missing, the more questions began to arise. Was he injured? Had he gotten lost in the wilderness? Was he still alive? As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, hope began to fade. Authorities followed every possible lead, from interviewing locals to reviewing security footage from nearby areas, but nothing connected them to Lesnar's whereabouts. There were no signs of foul play, no indication that Lesnar had been kidnapped or harmed by anyone. The more they searched, the more it seemed like he had simply vanished, disappearing without a trace in one of the most remote regions of California. Lesnar's disappearance caught the attention of both the local community and the broader public. His family, devastated by the uncertainty, spent months pleading for any information that could lead to his discovery. His father, Noe Velasquez, made repeated public appeals, describing his son as a kind and responsible man who would never have gone off trail without telling anyone. He was always careful, his father said. This isn't like him. We just want to know what happened. But despite their efforts, no new information emerged. The situation became even more complex as the months passed without any resolution. Mount Shasta, once a place of beauty and adventure, became a symbol of the unknown for Lesnar's family. How could a man so familiar with the outdoors disappear so completely? How could a hiker, accustomed to the dangers of the wilderness, vanish in a place he knew so well? Over time, the case seemed to slip further into the realm of the inexplicable. As more time passed, the search efforts dwindled, and the case became part of the long list of disappearances that seemed to defy explanation. Mount Shasta, for all its majesty, had once again claimed a life, or so it seemed. The theories surrounding Lesnar's disappearance ranged from plausible to speculative. Some believed that Lesnar might have become disoriented in the dense woods, wandered off the main trail, and succumbed to the elements. Others wondered if an accident, perhaps a fall, had occurred, leaving him unable to call for help. Some even speculated that he might have been involved in something more mysterious, though no evidence ever surfaced to support such claims. The most troubling possibility, however, was that Lesnar's disappearance had no logical explanation, that he had simply disappeared, swallowed by the vast wilderness without a trace. The case of Lesnar Noe Velasquez Cardenas serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictable nature of the wilderness. For the family, the unanswered questions are unbearable. The thought of Lesnar, a man who had taken so many trips to nature and understood its dangers, vanishing without a clue as to his fate is a cruel mystery. Was he caught in an accident that no one could predict? Did something happen that no one could foresee? Or is the truth hidden in a place no one can reach? Lesnar's disappearance remains unsolved, a mystery that haunts Mount Shasta and the people who loved him. The mountains stand silent, the trees whispering nothing. And in the absence of answers, the family is left with only the pain of an unresolved loss. Lesnar is remembered, his name etched in the hearts of those who loved him, but the questions of what happened that day, in the shadow of Mount Shasta, remain unanswered. Case 11. Crystal Ann Timage. It was a quiet afternoon in South Los Angeles, September 10, 1994, when 6-year-old Crystal Ann Timage vanished from her front yard. In the blink of an eye, a child who had been playing outside was gone, leaving behind only the stillness of an empty yard. The story of Crystal's disappearance has become a painful part of Los Angeles's unresolved mysteries. A case that still lingers, filled with questions and no answers. Crystal's mother, Vera Timage, was the first to notice that her daughter was missing. It wasn't unusual for Crystal to play outside, as she was known to be a lively, independent young girl, always running around in the neighborhood, her laughter echoing in the warm air. But on that day, Crystal simply did not come inside. Vera, filled with a sense of dread, immediately began to search the area, asking neighbors and calling out for her daughter. But the only response was the silence of the street. No one had seen anything unusual. No one had heard anything. As the hours passed, Vera's worry turned into panic. She called the police, who quickly responded to the scene. A search was launched in the neighborhood, with local authorities and community members combing through yards, alleys, and nearby streets, hoping for some sign of Crystal. But despite their efforts, no trace of the young girl could be found. The authorities began to investigate the area surrounding Crystal's home, but there was nothing. No physical evidence, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses. The only thing they had was the fact that Crystal had vanished from the very place where she had been playing just moments before. The search continued into the night and the following days, but with each hour that passed, the chances of finding Crystal alive grew slimmer. Months passed with no new leads. No clues surfaced. The case quickly grew cold, and it seemed as though Crystal had simply disappeared, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Her family was left with a devastating uncertainty. What had happened to their beloved Crystal? Had she been taken? Had she wandered off and gotten lost? Or was there something far more sinister behind her disappearance? These questions were all left unanswered. The mystery of Crystal's disappearance would take on a life of its own, with rumors and theories swirling around the case, but no hard evidence to support any of them. Theories ranged from the possibility of a stranger abduction to the idea that Crystal might have been taken by someone she knew. Some speculated that the quiet neighborhood had hidden secrets, places where children could vanish unnoticed, where no one would ask questions. But as time went on, the case began to fade from the headlines. No new evidence surfaced, and law enforcement's efforts slowed down. The Timage family, already shattered by Crystal's disappearance, was left to grieve in the absence of closure. The uncertainty of what had happened to their little girl was a wound that never healed, a pain that no amount of time could erase. It wasn't until years later that new theories emerged, some pointing to the possibility that Crystal's case might be linked to other disappearances in the area. But, like the rest of the investigation, these leads were never substantiated. As the years stretched into decades, the case of Crystal Ann Timage was lost in the fog of time, with only her family holding on to the hope that one day the truth would come to light. The lack of evidence and the eerie disappearance of Crystal became a symbol of the uncertainty that often accompanies such tragedies. What had happened to Crystal? Was she taken by someone who knew her, or did she simply vanish into the unknown? Could the search have been conducted differently, with more urgency? Could Crystal have been saved if the investigation had unfolded in another way? Despite the years that have passed, there are still those who hold out hope. The case remains unsolved, and Crystal's story continues to haunt those who remember her, who wonder how such a young, innocent child could disappear without a trace. The search for answers persists, albeit quietly, as Crystal's family continues to grapple with the unknown, with the painful reality that the child they loved and raised was taken from them in the blink of an eye. Case 12. Amanda Nicole Campbell. December 27, 1991, Fairfield, California. A quiet Friday afternoon, the kind where you can hear leaves scraping the sidewalk and sprinklers hissing on lawns. 4-year-old Amanda Nicole Eileen Campbell, nicknamed Nikki, had just finished playing with her older brother at a neighbor's house. She wanted to go see another friend down the block, Beth Ann, so she pedaled home alone to ask her father. He said yes. He even watched her cross Larchmont Drive from the living room window. That was the last moment anyone saw Amanda. She never arrived at Beth Ann's house. Police later confirmed Beth Ann wasn't home at all. Sometime in that short walk, just a few blocks, Amanda vanished. Her tiny pink bicycle was discovered later that evening by her grandmother, lying near a gate close to their neighborhood. It looked like someone had propped it up deliberately. Investigators initially thought Amanda's brother may have moved it, but that never held. Also found nearby, a single child-sized blue sock. Within 48 hours, the FBI joined the search. Hundreds of volunteers scoured the area. Bloodhounds traced Amanda's scent for nearly a mile before it disappeared into nothing. On December 29th, just 2 days after she vanished, a tip came in. A motorist reported seeing a little girl matching Amanda's description, possibly tied up, in a Datsun B210 sedan about 6 miles away in East Fairfield. Police responded immediately, but the car, and whoever was inside it, was already gone. The community was reeling. The Amber Swartz Foundation, created after another missing child case in nearby Pinole, joined the effort. A billboard went up in Sacramento. Amanda's face was now burned into the collective memory of Northern California. But weeks passed, then years, and still, no Amanda. In July 1992, another child, a 9-year-old girl, was abducted and raped in Napa, not far from Fairfield. She had been lured into a van by a man posing as a helpful adult. She was later found alive at a community college in Fairfield. Authorities wondered, could this be connected to Amanda's case? At the time, both incidents were tied geographically to the same side of town. A suspect was eventually arrested for the Napa case in 2010, but his name was never linked definitively to Amanda's disappearance. One name that did keep coming up was Timothy Bindner. In January 1992, just weeks after Amanda disappeared, Bindner was reportedly spotted climbing out of a ditch not far from the Campbell home. Fairfield detectives considered him suspicious. In December of that year, police searched his van and home. What they found raised even more concern. Inside the vehicle were posters of missing girls, including Amber Swartz Garcia and Michaela Gorecht. In the back, a small child's shirt. On his person, a chunk of stone believed to be chipped from a child's gravestone. Bindner was arrested, not for Amanda's case, but for disruption of children. He was soon released and never charged with her abduction. When questioned, he claimed he was doing God's work, helping locate missing children, calling them the lost sheep. He even appeared on national television, The Jane Whitney Show, sitting in front of a wall plastered with missing posters. On air, he told Amanda's mother and the mothers of Amber and Michaela that he felt their pain. When confronted with the accusation that Amanda's scent had been traced to his van, he answered, "If I was guilty, I would have broken down." Bindner later sued the city of Fairfield for defamation. He won $90,000. But the court ruling didn't erase public suspicion. A best-selling true crime book was published later that year. Its title, Stalemate, a shocking true story of child abduction and murder. Bindner's name was all over it. Years later, another figure entered the picture, David Zanstra, a former pastor who served in Fairfield between 1990 and 2005. In 2023, he was arrested in Pennsylvania for the 1975 murder of 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington. He had lived within walking distance of Amanda's home at the time of her disappearance. For a moment, it felt like closure was finally within reach. But by the end of 2023, Fairfield police cleared Zanstra. He was acquitted of the Harrington murder in early 2025. More than 3 decades have passed. Amanda would be 38 today. Her DNA is entered in the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Her face lives on in age-progressed renderings, kept alive by investigators, her family, and a case number etched in databases, MP5917. But there are no new leads, no suspects facing charges, no confirmed sightings. Case 13, Hans Lippener. In the dense, mist-filled woods of Humboldt County, California, Hans Lippener, a 54-year-old man, disappeared without a trace on June 6, 2018. His story, marked by an eerie quietness, began with an ordinary road trip. A trip that would lead him to a mysterious and unresolved end, one that continues to trouble his family and the authorities to this day. Hans had always been an independent and adventurous soul. A man who had spent much of his life traveling the U.S., he wasn't unfamiliar with the rugged beauty and isolation of Northern California. He had settled in Humboldt County, living a peaceful life with his dog, Taz. Hans was not a man prone to sudden, unexpected behaviors. His friends described him as reliable and grounded, someone who would always keep in touch and keep his plans. He had no enemies, and there were no known issues in his life that would lead anyone to believe his disappearance was anything but a mystery. On June 6th, Hans left his home in his van, planning to go for a hike in the wilderness. His destination was a remote part of Humboldt County, a place known for its dense forests and difficult terrain. It wasn't unusual for Hans to go out for these trips alone, as he loved spending time in nature. He had been hiking for years, exploring the vast wilderness that many people in the area would never dare to. He had the experience, the knowledge, and the equipment to navigate the terrain. But this trip would be different. Hans would never return. The last known contact Hans made was when he spoke with a friend, informing them of his plans. That call would be the last time anyone would hear from him. By all accounts, there was nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. The weather was calm, the trails were familiar to him, and his state of mind seemed steady. There was no warning sign that anything could go wrong. It was days before anyone began to worry. When Hans didn't return by June 7th, his family and friends began to take notice. They knew something was amiss. Hans had always been punctual, and his love for his dog, Taz, meant that he wouldn't stay away too long. By June 8th, his family contacted the authorities, and the search for Hans began. Authorities quickly found his van, parked at a trailhead just off a rural road in Humboldt County. The vehicle was locked, and there were no signs of a struggle or foul play. Inside the van, they found his personal belongings. Nothing seemed out of place. There was no sign that Hans had been in any kind of distress. His belongings were packed as if he had simply stepped away for a moment. But Hans was nowhere to be found. No trail, no footprints, no indication of where he had gone. It was as if he had vanished. Over the next few weeks, authorities, along with search teams, combed through the dense forests of Humboldt County, using dogs and helicopters to search for any trace of Hans. His family anxiously awaited news, but each day that passed brought no new answers. There was no indication of where he had gone or what could have happened to him. The woods of Humboldt County, vast and rugged, seemed to hold their secrets. As the investigation unfolded, several leads were pursued, but none of them led anywhere. Witnesses came forward claiming to have seen a man matching Hans's description in the area around the time he disappeared, but none of these sightings could be definitively linked to him. Investigators found nothing that could indicate foul play, and they could find no evidence that Hans had been involved in an accident or had become lost in the wilderness. The only thing they were sure of was that he had vanished, completely and without a trace. What made Hans's case even more perplexing was the lack of any physical evidence or any signs of a struggle. He had been an experienced traveler and hiker. His disappearance seemed inexplicable. No one knew if he had suffered an injury or if something else had occurred. Had Hans gotten lost? Did he run into someone who meant him harm? Or did he simply disappear on his own, leaving no trail behind? Theories began to emerge, but no evidence was ever found to support any of them. Some speculated that Hans had been the victim of a crime, someone who had taken him or harmed him. Others suggested that he may have suffered an accident, perhaps falling or becoming disoriented. But the lack of physical evidence made it impossible to verify any of these theories. With each passing day, the case grew colder, and the hope of finding Hans alive began to fade. What made Hans's disappearance even more tragic was the impact it had on his family. His mother, Hilda, a quiet and strong woman, was left devastated by the loss of her son. For months, she remained hopeful, keeping a vigil for any signs that Hans would return. But the passage of time wore down that hope. Her son had simply disappeared from the face of the earth, and the more she held on, the more it became clear that the answers she sought might never come. In the years that followed, the case of Hans Lapuner's disappearance continued to haunt the community and the authorities. Though the investigation has not been closed, there has been little progress. The search for Hans has become another tragic story in the long list of missing persons in remote areas of California, a reminder of how easily someone can disappear without a trace in the wilderness.